I think, I've been back for about 14 months now, 15 months, and it's been an absolute privilege to be back in South Africa, despite some of the frustrations that I think we all experience. The moment you've lived overseas for more than 6 months, if the internet is slower, you don't get deliveries, all that sort of thing. But despite all of those challenges, I strongly believe that there is a massive role to play for retailers in South Africa to really grasp the nettle in terms of the opportunity with respect to online as a whole, but particularly with respect to how we use search in our businesses and understand all of the associated pieces of information that come out of that can help us be better retailers. But before I start, I just wondered, can I get a sense in the room of who's actually in retail at the moment? Who's retailing? And who sells stuff online? Okay, so that's about, 50% or so. And the suppliers to the retail industry? Okay, so the majority of us are retailers, but it looks like a slight majority don't actually have an online presence, which is fantastic for the purposes of this presentation. One of the things that I was privileged to do when I was in the UK was work with a number of really large organizations that went through a real journey from the point where they were real bricks and mortar businesses, and take them through that process where they became very digitally orientated. But one of the occasions that I had that really brought home to me how important it is to understand detail was working with Sainsbury's. And I walked into a store with some of the management. We were invited to go and do a day with them, understand a bit more about what the executive team do on a day-to-day basis. And one of the things that they do, believe it or not, is they go on little site visits. And these are not announced. So it's a complete surprise to the store manager when they arrive, but you've got a whole bunch of executives who suddenly arrive in your store. Now you can imagine this is pretty nerve-wracking for everybody in the store. But what was absolutely astonishing, you walk through the door and immediately they pick up on all of the details. If there's a bit of mess on the floor, if there's a gap in the shelf, that absolutely annoys them tremendously. That means they can't sell that space. Even more so, it means a wholesaler is probably not paying them for that space. They take one look at the queues at the tills. If the queues are too long, snap, snap, let's get some people behind those tills, please, and shorten those queues. And the detail consciousness of these people when they walk into their stores is absolutely phenomenal. And I'm sure if you own your own retail presence, you feel exactly the same way. You want to know exactly what's happening in your store. You understand every single bit of detail. The irony was, though, that at the time that they were expressing themselves in that store and assessing all of the little bits and pieces that were wrong and really displaying all of the different experiences that they'd built up over the years that they'd worked for Sainsbury's, on their website, they were losing thousands and thousands of pounds an hour because people were dropping off before they actually finished buying the products. There was something broken. And all of the detail in that store probably made them, that they noticed, probably made them a few extra £1,000 that day. But if they'd exercised the same amount of vigilance on their online stores, they would have made tens and hundreds of thousands of pounds a day. Now, fortunately, a lot of those problems have been solved. But I think that some of the types of issues that we experience in terms of understanding, how do we actually change our retail businesses? What sort of detail do we need to make this work? Those are the sorts of things that we'll be talking about briefly today. It's early in the morning, so we'll just refresh our memory as to how big the internet really is. I think we're all familiar with a lot of these stats, but I think the one that really always gets me in terms of the size of the internet globally is the one on the bottom right-hand side. So 60 hours of video are uploaded to YouTube every minute. It might not be so necessarily relevant to your retail business, but that just gives you a sense of the scale of the internet, which means that in the last 3 or 4 minutes or so, we've had 240 hours of video uploaded to YouTube. Now, who's going to watch all of that? I think there's a lot of people with too much time on their hands, that's for sure. Never mind watching it, certainly uploading it. But the internet is huge. And South Africans are adopting the internet in their droves. By last count, according to Arthur Goldstuck, there are about 8.2 million people online in South Africa, and that's a 2011 number. My sense is that that might actually be slightly conservative. If you speak to the operators about how much data is consumed, and we look at our own numbers, I suspect that's slightly higher, anything between 10 and 12 million. It's hard to put a really accurate number on it, but I still think that there's more people out there that are currently using the internet. More importantly, how are people using the internet? People are using search engines to actually find information, and 62% of people, never mind using desktop, are using their mobiles to find information using search engines. I think that's an incredible number. And I think hopefully everybody who's got a smartphone in the room has probably used Google, maybe even once today. I know I use maps just to get into the building. So I think there are all sorts of different ways that we can use our phones to access the internet, and perhaps we don't even recognize it when we do it. In South Africa alone, search queries for Google have grown by something like 5 times over the last 5 years. So a significant number, and I'll drill into that in a little bit. And there are over 16% of South Africans have smartphones. So if you think about the reach that that gives people on the move, there's a huge amount of people who are accessing the internet when they're actually on the go. And from a retail point of view, I think that's particularly important because most of us will have a physical presence at some point. So understanding what your consumer is looking for, where they're looking for it, is incredibly important. If you can deliver them a result that tells them, my store is over here, and you've just looked for my product. Now, according to Arthur Goldstuck, it takes about 5 years for the average internet user to become comfortable with using the internet. And that's one of the reasons why online commerce in mature internet economies like the UK and the US has grown so fast, is because people have been online for a long time. But I think that in South Africa, we're at a tipping point too, because most of the people who are online at the moment have been online for a significant period of time. The reticence to use online information, the reticence to actually spend money with a credit card online, seems to be diminishing as people become more au fait with the internet as a technology. And I think that's a great place to be for South African retailers. Not only that, one of the other things I think that points us all in the right direction is the phenomenal growth of online retail in South Africa. In 2010, it grew by 30%, more than 2 billion rand spent online. And in 2011, we expect that to be 40% more when the numbers eventually come out. 2012, it's likely to be 40% plus yet again. Now, that's growing a hell of a lot faster than physical retail. So the opportunity is there for retailers to really make hay while the sun shines, whilst your physical stores are potentially experiencing a decline or some trouble. Online retail is growing apace, and it's important to recognize that consumers are actually probably moving even faster than some of us are in our businesses. We commissioned some research recently to just try and understand, is this a phenomenon that's good for big business or only big business? And the answer is emphatically no. If you run a small retail enterprise, the chances are that if you have a website, you are more competitive and more profitable. In fact, I think 34% of our respondents said that they were more profitable if they had a website. Once again, that's a really compelling reason for a small retailer to get involved in the internet. And I think this idea that you have to be either big, have a lot of resource, or particularly skilled in order to adopt an online approach to retail, this blows it out the water. It's entirely possible for small businesses to do the same thing as well. And I think that's a huge boon to the South African economy, where a number of the retailers that we speak to are in fact small to medium-sized enterprises, just in terms of the number of stores that they have and the number of employees. Now, we know the internet is big. We know that there's lots of opportunity. How do we actually grasp this opportunity? Now, I don't mean this in a sort of a stalkerish kind of way, but they are looking for you. And this does look a bit stalkerish, or maybe he's a bird watcher, I'm not too sure. But the fact of the matter is that all of the statistics that we have indicate that there is a significant amount of interest in what people are looking for online from a retail point of view. And just to give an indication, we know that through research we've done in South Africa, that 74% of online shoppers do their pre-purchase research online, and then they might go to the store. That was really interesting, and it ties in with what you were saying earlier. I think one of the barriers that we seem to think of in South Africa is fulfillment. Online, we think about online retail only in terms of perhaps advertising the product online and then actually delivering it to the address. That doesn't have to be the case. Half of that process can in fact happen online, and I'm sure a majority of it does. And we all have personal experience of buying big ticket items, cars, mountain bikes in my instance, houses. Where do you do your research first? Holidays. It all happens online. Now, in a lot of those instances, the conversion actually takes place offline, absolutely. But that doesn't make this an offline process. It actually means that the first half all happen online. And if you're not taking advantage of the fact that people are actually researching their purchases before they come to your store and deciding which stores to go to, you're missing out a massive opportunity, because so many people are using online to actually decide and whittle down the list of stores that they'd actually like to go to before they make the purchase. One of the things that we're privileged to have at Google is this idea that, or this notion of all of the different things that people are looking for. Now, I don't know what you were looking for or anybody. We don't tie it down to the specific person. But we do know in aggregate what sorts of things people are looking for in South Africa. What this graph represents is all of the different terms that are related to online shopping in South Africa. And you can see how over the years, and it goes from 2006 at the bottom all the way through to 2011, how of all of those years, in 2011, the basket of searches that we use to define the online shopping market in South Africa actually grew by almost 50%. That's incredibly fast. And the most interesting thing for this graph for me is that it's actually accelerating. Look at the gap between 2011 and 2010. That is growing super fast. I expect this to grow much faster this year as internet prices continue to drop and hopefully as speeds continue to rise. Pretty importantly, we touched on mobile earlier on. Almost 100% growth in people looking for online shopping related terms on their mobile phones. And once again, look at the growth. It's absolutely stellar. This is probably not a market you wanted to be in 2009 or 2008, although people have been talking about the year of the mobile probably for the last 5 years. Perhaps last year was really the year of the mobile, because this year, if you're not on mobile, it's almost certain that you're missing an opportunity. And the stats just bear this out. The growth just talks to us and tells us that there is a huge number of people out there who are looking for our products whilst they're on the move. So if we understand that the internet is big, and we understand that from a search point of view, there are a lot of people using Google, and a lot of people using Google on their phones, a lot of people using it on their desktop, what can we actually do to take advantage of this opportunity? Probably one of the first things we can do is really try and understand our consumer. And there's a whole bunch of tools that we make available for free that enable you to do that. And I'll just highlight one for the moment because I think it brings out some interesting patterns. The first point of departure is we did some research in the UK to try and identify how many sites people go to before they actually make an online purchase. And you come up with some really complicated graphs. This graph perhaps not so complicated. So from a retail point of view, it just goes to show that there are probably 3 or 4 different sites that people go to before they decide to buy. And Google is at the center of that. Look how different this is when people are looking for a new house. Think of all of the different components of your house search. You want to know where the schools are. Perhaps you want to know how far it is from work. Perhaps you want to know, where is the nearest park? How easy is it to walk to work, potentially, depending on where you live, although perhaps not in Joburg. All of these different things. So there's a huge amount of information that you actually need to make this decision. As a result, the online journey gets incredibly complicated. Now, fortunately, it's possible to use data to analyze all of this stuff. Now, I don't think this will be the journey for everybody. This is what we aggregated as a typical journey. But using insights for search and a variety of other tools, we can start to simplify these patterns so that we can see more about what it means for our particular business. So if you were online right now or in the next couple of days, Google Insights for Search, it comes to the top of the list. What you're able to do is to plug in a search term, define the time that you'd like to evaluate this term for, and it will tell you how many searches relative to other searches in the Google universe took place for that particular term. Now, because we're all very fashion conscious in the office, or not, depending on who you speak to, we decided that we'd look at the term boots. So in South Africa, this is the seasonality for the term boots. Now, it's quite interesting because you can see that there's a decided spike over the winter period as things get colder. Now, I'm imagining I'm a retailer for boots here, or for shoe products, shoe-related products. Now, in 2010, that green line was decidedly smaller than 2011. So we can assume that there's a little bit more interest. But perhaps this has to do with other things. And I was quite interested to see this year, 2012, that searches for boots are slightly down on previous years. Now, if I'm a retailer and I'm able to use these sorts of tools, I can actually assess the demand for my products in almost real time. And that will determine to what extent, for instance, I need to stock up. I can spot trends before they happen. And if I'm doing this and none of my other competitors are doing this, I'm stealing a march. I think this is valuable insight. Now, why do we think 2012 is perhaps less than 2011 at this stage for boots? Theories? Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. This summer has been slightly better than last year, and we've been trying to do this, but we can't quite find the data. But if you were actually able to correlate temperature data and run that over the top of that graph, I can almost guarantee that searches for boots will correlate almost entirely with temperature. Now, that's super interesting, and that's how data can actually impact your business. I know a lot of people will be doing this sort of analysis, but imagine you could do this across all of your products, and you could start to make these correlations using not just the tools that you find in the offline world like temperatures, but using the combination of what you can find by looking at what people are looking for online. Let's have a look at another super interesting example. This is what happened to the television market over the course of the last couple of years. So what we did with Insights for Search is we used a couple of different terms. 3D TV, pretty brand new product. LCD TV, LED TV. 3D TV is in blue, and you can see very clearly where it was introduced into the market. Now, bear in mind, these are searches on Google, right? So how did people know that a 3D TV was being launched into the market? Television, all right? Television, offline, actually drove all of this interest. Now, if you were Samsung or Sony or any other related television operator or manufacturer, and you did not advertise online at that point in time, you would have been missing a massive opportunity. No doubt they spent millions telling people that 3D TVs are now all the rage and that, in 3 years' time, everybody will have one. But the fact of the matter was, there was no online presence at that point. But all of that media money drove massive online interest. Now, you can also see how that happened for LED TVs a little bit earlier on in 2009 in the yellow line. Once again, massive spike of above-the-line media spend drove a huge amount of interest. Now, as you can see, those graphs tend to merge a little as the product launches disappear. But you can establish one interesting trend, and that is that LCD TVs seem to be declining in interest. Now, once again, I'm a retailer. I'm selling all of these different things. I want to establish what the patterns are. I want to know, how am I going to steal a march from my competition? One of the things that you can do is look at trying to identify these sorts of trends in terms of long-term demand. It might be that this is telling me very, very clearly, and perhaps we all know this now, but certainly in August 07, if you'd recognized this then, you would probably have been a better retailer than anybody else in the marketplace, because you would have known that LCD TVs were on their way out. At the time, it probably wasn't quite as clear-cut as it is now. So just another interesting example. And probably my favorite example. So this is the search for flowers in South Africa over time. And you can see from January 05 to September 07, just to give us a couple of years. And you can see there are a couple of spikes that tend to happen on a very regular basis. Let's try and evaluate and assess what they are. So spike number 1, Valentine's Day. Now, I'm pretty amazed, right? So Valentine's Day happens to be the smallest spike. Okay, so I apologize on behalf of all men to the women in the room. On the other hand, we love our mothers. South African men, eh? We love our mothers. But there's one more spike. Yeah, you see, there's some men here who've obviously indulged in this practice. Yes, it happens to be Secretary's Day. We love our girlfriends and wives. Mother's Day. So let's run this hypothesis before we actually diss all South African men. Who buys the flowers on Secretary's Day? All right. Okay. So I think that's what we're talking about here. So this is not the men's problem. This is not the men's fault. This is secretaries buying flowers on Secretary's Day. Okay. Now, I like this example because it's counterintuitive, and it's about data, and it's a cool way of using trends. Because if you'd asked me, I would have said the biggest spike is almost always on Valentine's Day. And that would have been my immediate insights, so to speak, based on my own experience of maybe buying the odd flower. But as it so happens, that's not the case, and that's why data and understanding trends is so important to your business, is because a lot of the stuff that you will be able to glean from online and from actual information, real data, is perhaps counterintuitive, and it will tell you things about your business that you didn't know, and it will help you be a better retailer because you can plan in advance once you've got these sorts of insights. So what else can we do? And what other questions should we ask ourselves before we decide to move forward in this brand new online world? I get a sense sometimes when I see some of the websites that are out there, and I'm not just saying all South African sites, there are some fantastic ones, but I really do think that we need to start asking ourselves the question, what is our website for? And I know that sounds pretty basic, but seriously, you look at some sites and you have to ask yourself, what is this website there for? Is it a brochure? Am I just here for what? There's no call to action. There's no conversion. I've not been asked to do anything. If I am asked to do anything, by the time I get to check out, it breaks. I've got to register. I've got to list, 30, 40 different details just in order to buy something. Do they really want to sell something to me? You've really got to ask yourself, what are websites for? And that harks back to a previous question, which is, what is my business about? So the first thing in order to establish, I think, real online success is to develop some sort of framework for understanding how you're going to build your site, what it's going to be for, and how you're going to measure the success of that. Now, this is a model that was developed by a guy called Avinash Kaushik, who is one of the absolute gurus of online data. Now, I'd heartily recommend that you go and just Google him, Avinash Kaushik. He has got the most incredible tips and tricks for using analytics, and all written in a way that pretty much everybody can understand. But he developed this model, which is, look, it's pretty simple stuff. But the importance of this is that when we build our sites, is that we engage everybody in that process. Often when we think about developing website analytics, we think of this as a technical process. It's not a technical process. Successful websites and successful website analytics is about business understanding. And that means that from the top down, we need to understand what are our business objectives for the site. And my advice is when you do that sort of assessment, is get everybody involved from the CEO down. There's nothing worse than developing a set of stats to a CEO who doesn't understand what they're there for and doesn't understand what business objectives they relate to. I think we can all relate to that experience. So get that person in early on in order to assess what it is that's most important for the business. And in this case, we talked about, so they've decided that Global World Domination Inc. The site is about creating awareness, generating leads, and highlighting events that are going to take place. 3 very clear objectives. Then establish, what do you want people to do on the site? Now, once again, this sounds really simple, but so often you'll go to a site and you just simply won't know what it is that the key action is that people want you to do. So set it up front. Understand what you want. So what's the website goal? 1, in this case, reinforce offline and online advertising. And we've just seen how important that is. When you launch a new product and you do that with a big above-the-line campaign, if you don't actually support that online, you're missing a huge amount of interest, which potentially your competitors are going to hoover up. Think about what you want to do in terms of an action. It could be you want people to actually buy things online, and that's fantastic. But more often than not, a lot of the businesses that we deal with are about generating leads. Think about insurance. I think there might be one business at the moment that's experimenting with actually buying insurance online directly right now. But everybody else is all about generating leads. And even that can have an economic value associated with it, that form. Think about every other little action that you want people to take on the site, whether it's leaving an email address, registering for an event, and try and attribute some form of economic value to that particular action. And that will then drive the kind of success factors that you're looking for. What are the KPIs that I want to get out of this? Now, this simple model is something that's it's so simple, you can present it to everybody, they understand what you're talking about. But this is at heart, this is what web analytics is all about. It gets much more technical in terms of the implementation, but the business process piece is something we all should be involved in, and everybody in your business should have a stake in it. Let's think about what this might mean actually for a site. So in order not to offend anybody in South Africa, we've chosen a UK-based retail site, Waitrose. So if we think about how many different conversion points there are on a site like this, I think we counted at least 10 or 11. Every single one of those can have some economic value associated with it. Now, Avinash Kaushik talks about two different types of conversions. He talks about what he calls a macro conversion. Now, macro conversion is, what is the primary thing you want people to do? In this instance, you want people to shop online. It might be you want them to fill in a lead form. It could be that you simply want them to watch a video, for instance. So there could be any number of macro conversions, but what's your primary conversion? And that needs to have a value associated with it. Secondly, start to identify all of the other different associated conversions across the site so that you get a full picture of the real economic value of your site. Now, if you only measured the shopping conversions on this site, you'd probably be missing out almost half of the economic value of this site, if not more, because there are so many other micro conversions. There are registrations, searching for a branch, booking a cooking class, and you can see all of the different types of conversions that could take place. Now, in the online world, once you've understood your consumer, you've understood all of the searches, you've matched up the demand with your site, the most important thing that you can do is understand what people do when they get there, but it needs to be measured and needs to be associated with some form of economic value. And only once you've identified all of the macro conversions, plus the variety of micro conversions on your site, will you be able to get the full picture of the economic value for your site. Now, this is a bit of a bugbear of mine, only because trying to speak to people about what really matters when you speak to them about sort of online conversions or their website is quite difficult. And there seems to be a disconnect between, if you ask somebody, what's important with your store? Well, what's your major goal? People say, yeah, I want to sell stuff. Okay, how do you measure that? Sales. Okay, that's pretty cool. However, online, what tends to happen is we look at our different traffic sources, where we're getting traffic from. It could be from Google, it could be from Facebook, it could be from anywhere. What do people want to measure? Clicks. Clicks are not interesting. Not at all. No one's interested in a click. If you in your store said, I want to measure the number of people who walk in but don't buy, you'll be laughed out, of course. That's not an interesting conversion point. So, in this particular example, what we have here is a website. We've added all the economic value pieces together, and we're measuring a particular macro conversion. And what we've decided to do, we're going to advertise on Google. And as we all know, on Google, advertising is pretty simple. You bid in a keyword, and you pay per click. So for every time somebody clicks on your ad, you pay a fee for that. So it's called cost per click advertising. So on the first column, we've got the number of clicks our ad generated. In the second, we've got the cost per click. On the third, we've got the number of conversions. So what actually happened on my site? How many people bought or completed my macro conversion? And we've got the cost. More often than not, the companies that we speak to are interested just in how much traffic they send. How many clicks did I send? Now let's see how many ways this is wrong. Number one, you can see in the first column, traffic source B delivered 10,000 clicks. On the face of it, that looks fantastic. However, and we also see CPCs, the cost per click for that was 50 cents, so cheaper than the rest as well. However, move one step down the line and look at your conversions, it only delivered 2 conversions. So we can see that just by looking at clicks, which is a really poor metric, and the same can be said for visits on your sites, just by looking at visits, you're not actually establishing what the true economic value is of that visitor to your site. So clicks don't work, conversions work. Now let's have a look at the next piece. Now the reason for this is, if you've got those 10 conversions from traffic source A, it cost you 100 Rand, but every transaction was worth 50 Rand. You actually made 500 Rand. Those 2 conversions from traffic source B were only worth 100 Rand, but it cost you 2,500 Rand. And traffic source C, which has got a very realistic number associated with it as opposed to the other rounded ones, happens to have delivered 15 conversions at 50 Rand, 7,500 Rands worth of value. So you can see how important it is. If you had just focused on this previous piece, on clicks, visits, and every activity that is pre-conversion, you will not be getting a good idea of what the value of your website is. So moving to a conversion-based model is absolutely critical. And if we go one step back, you can see these are all of the conversions that you could be measuring, potentially, on your site. And by attributing economic value to these, you will be able to see what the real value of your online process, of your website is, and how much value it's delivering to your bottom line. All of this is super important, and it's something that I think that as a retailer in South Africa, I know people will tell me they do it, but you start asking questions about how many products do you have on your site? We've got 100 products. Maybe we've got 10,000 products. What's your ROI per product? No idea. Because they don't measure ROI per product, they measure it across the whole site. But how can you not know what the most profitable product is? Now, these sorts of questions are the sorts of questions that need to be asked continuously in order to get better value from your website. One of the questions that I ask people is, if you worked for Amazon and you carried on doing the job that you're doing right now for Amazon, would you still have a job tomorrow? That's a good question, and I think it's a good way to measure yourself in the online space, because if you think that you're doing the good thing now, just go think about what Amazon does, how successful it is, and then ask yourself whether in the online space you're doing a good job. Shoppers form a very negative view of your overall brand if your site is not constructed well. And according to some research that was done in the UK recently, it only takes 8 seconds for a visitor to your site to discover or to realize whether they want to shop there or not. 8 seconds is all you've got to grab them. So making sure that your site is compelling is incredibly important. Don't worry about this so much. It looks complicated in and of itself, and we'll move on quickly. But the point is that all of this complexity we've just talked about can be simplified by using a decent piece of web analytics. And that will mean that you can understand the flow through your website, what people do when they arrive on the home page, all the way through to the purchase point. And understanding what they do gives the ability to change each of those different steps and make positive amendments. And that will give you a true view of the value of your website, understanding the funnel, in other words, people who enter your site, all the way through to those who actually convert. And that's the holy grail from a marketing point of view. That will then enable you to identify new opportunities for your site and potentially get a bit more creative. Now, we all saw this video, I hope. Anybody not see mountain biker get hit by a buck? Okay, you've got to leave the room if you didn't see it. So what's the biggest lesson from this particular video, do you think? My sense is the biggest lesson from this is that timing is everything. If that buck had been 1 second faster or slower, he wouldn't have hit that guy, and there wouldn't have been 12 million views on YouTube. So yeah, so timing is everything, and the same is true for the online world right now in South Africa. We're at an inflection point where there are so many users online, We've got the technical capacity to deliver a great experience, but retailers need to be the buck. You see where we're going to here? Retailers need to be the buck so that you can absolutely target the consumer. And at that moment that they're interested, and by understanding analytics, that's what it would enable you to do. And also potentially be a bit interesting like Capitec and publish an ad. And last but not least, understanding analytics helps us to do one other really important thing, particularly in Africa. Does everybody know what the hippo is? Other than that particularly annoying ad. When I put the slide together, I didn't realize how appropriate it was at the moment. You just can't avoid the hippo at the moment, let's face it. So, the hippo is the highest paid person's opinion. Data helps us avoid that guy and manage that guy better. Because with the right data, you can convince them to do anything. And that's why data is important for your business. So thank you very much. I hope that's given you some sense of the kind of things that are possible. If you have any questions, I'll be here, I think, during the coffee break as well. Thank you very much.